Jasmine Taylor stared in disbelief at the settlement check, $20 million. 6 months ago, her son Andre had been brutally tased on Flight 1372 for simply asking to use the restroom. Now, this airline would never forget the day they messed with Samuel Taylor's son. Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want more stories about everyday people standing up against injustice. Now let's see how a routine flight turned into a landmark civil rights case that changed an entire industry. The morning of June 15th began like any other for the Taylor family. Andre Taylor, a bright and polite 14-year-old honor student, was excitedly packing his carry-on bag for his first ever flight. He had triple-checked his packing list, making sure he had his headphones, books, and the travel journal his father had given him to document the trip. "Mom, do you think the clouds look different from above?" Andre asked, his brown eyes wide with anticipation as he zipped up his backpack. Jasmine Taylor smiled at her son, adjusting her nurse's watch as she prepared for their trip to Boston. The mother-son journey was a special treat, a chance to visit the prestigious universities Andre dreamed of attending someday. Harvard, MIT, Boston College, all possibilities for a student with his academic record. "I wish Dad could come with us," Andre said, his excitement momentarily dimming. "Your father would be here if he could," Jasmine assured him. "But this case is important. You know how passionate he is about his work." Samuel Taylor was indeed passionate about his work. As one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in Atlanta, he had built his reputation defending victims of racial discrimination. That morning, he was preparing for a crucial hearing in a class action lawsuit against a major corporation accused of discriminatory hiring practices. "He'll join us in 3 days," Jasmine reminded Andre, just in time for our campus tour at MIT. Samuel kissed his wife and son goodbye, promising to call as soon as his hearing concluded. "Remember everything you see, Andre. I want a full report when I get there," he said with a wink. The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was smooth, and the check-in process went without a hitch. As they waited at the gate for boarding to begin, Andre people watched, taking notes in his journal about the diverse travelers around them. When boarding for Sky High Airways Flight 1372 was announced, Andre and Jasmine joined the line. The boarding process was orderly, with first-class passengers and those needing assistance boarding first. When their group was called, they made their way down the jetway. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant with a plastic smile greeted passengers. "Welcome aboard," she said mechanically to the middle-aged white couple ahead of them. When the couple mentioned it was their anniversary trip, the attendant, whose name had read Brenda Wilson, immediately warmed up, offering congratulations and promising them a special dessert during the meal service. When Andre and Jasmine reached the door, Brenda's smile stiffened. "Boarding passes," she said flatly, extending her hand without making eye contact. No welcome aboard, no warm wishes for their trip. Andre noticed the shift, but said nothing as they made their way to their seats in row 24. As they settled in, Andre observed Brenda's interactions with other passengers. Her demeanor seemed to shift depending on who she was addressing. With white passengers, she was attentive and warm. With passengers of color, particularly black passengers, her tone became curt, her instructions more commanding than helpful. "Did you notice that?" Andre whispered to his mother, his observant nature picking up on the subtle discrimination. Jasmine nodded slightly. "Just focus on enjoying your first flight, honey. Some people carry their biases everywhere they go." As the final preparations for takeoff were completed, Andre thumbed through the safety card in the seat back pocket, memorizing the emergency exits and procedures. The plane backed away from the gate, taxied to the runway, and soon they were airborne, Atlanta growing smaller beneath them. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began moving about the cabin. Andre was mesmerized by the view from his window seat, the patchwork of fields and forests, the winding silver ribbons of rivers, and the cotton ball clouds now below them. About an hour into the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Folks were expecting some turbulence ahead. I'm turning the seatbelt sign back on. Please return to your seats and make sure your seatbelts are fastened. Andre had been sipping apple juice, and now he felt an urgent need to use the restroom. He tried to wait, shifting uncomfortably in his seat as the minutes passed. The fastened seatbelt sign remained illuminated, but the turbulence hadn't materialized, and Andre noticed several passengers ignoring the warning to use the restrooms. A white teenager about Andre's age from a few rows ahead stood up and walked to the bathroom. Brenda, who was checking the cabin, said nothing to him. After 15 more uncomfortable minutes, Andre couldn't wait any longer. With a glance at his mother, who was immersed in her novel, he unfastened his seatbelt and stood up. He made his way carefully into the aisle, holding onto seat backs for stability. Before he could take 3 steps, Brenda appeared before him, her arms crossed. "The seatbelt sign is on," she said sharply. "Return to your seat immediately." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Andre replied politely. "I really need to use the restroom. I saw others going, so I thought it would be okay." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I won't tell you again. Return to your seat now." Andre, confused by the disparity in treatment, gestured discreetly toward the bathroom where the white teenager was just exiting. "But that boy just went, and you didn't stop him. I'll be quick, I promise." Something in Brenda's expression hardened. Her nostrils flared slightly, and her lips pressed into a thin line. The bathroom door opened, and the white teenager emerged, walking back to his seat without comment from Brenda. "Are you questioning my authority?" Brenda asked, her voice rising, enough that nearby passengers turned to look. "No, ma'am," Andre said, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. "I just really need to use the bathroom." Jasmine, now aware of the situation, stood up. "Excuse me," she began. "My son simply needs to—" Brenda cut her off with a raised hand. "Ma'am, I need your son to comply with safety regulations. The seatbelt sign is on." By now, several passengers were watching the exchange. A middle-aged black man in a cardigan a few rows back frowned at the escalating situation. A white woman nearby whispered something to her husband. Andre stood frozen, unsure what to do, embarrassment and confusion evident on his face. "I'm sorry if I did something wrong," he said, his voice small. "I just don't understand why." The flight attendant's hand moved to her pocket, and something in her expression shifted from annoyance to something darker. The tension in the cabin was palpable as passengers sensed the situation spiraling beyond a routine enforcement of airline rules. The next few seconds unfolded in slow motion, forever seared into the memories of everyone on Flight 1372. Brenda's hand emerged from her pocket, clutching what appeared to be a small black device. Before anyone could react, she pointed it at Andre and pressed a button. 2 metal prongs shot out, trailing thin wires that connected with Andre's chest. His body went rigid as 50,000 volts of electricity coursed through him. His eyes widened in shock and pain, a strangled cry escaping his lips before his muscles contracted violently. "Andre!" Jasmine screamed, lunging forward as her son's body convulsed. The boy collapsed into the aisle, his limbs twitching uncontrollably as the electrical current continued to flow. The cabin erupted in chaos. Passengers gasped, some standing to get a better view, others shrinking back in horror. The sharp smell of ozone filled the air, mingling with the scent of fear. "Oh my God, she tased him. She tased that child," a woman shrieked from the back of the plane. Phones appeared in hands as passengers began recording the shocking scene. The white teenager who had used the bathroom moments before stared open-mouthed, his face pale with shock. After what seemed like an eternity, but was only seconds, Brenda released the trigger. Andre lay motionless on the floor, small involuntary tremors still running through his body. A wet stain spread across his jeans the electricity had caused him to lose control of his bladder. Jasmine fell to her knees beside her son, her nurse's training kicking in despite her maternal terror. Andre, can you hear me?" She placed her fingers against his neck, feeling for his pulse, which raced erratically under her fingertips. "Stay back, ma'am," Brenda commanded, still holding the taser. He was becoming aggressive and non-compliant. "He's 14 years old," Jasmine shouted, tears streaming down her face. He needed to use the bathroom. What is wrong with you? The middle-aged black man in the cardigan stood up, his face a mask of controlled fury. I saw the whole thing, he said, his voice carrying throughout the now silent cabin. That boy did nothing wrong, nothing. Sir, please remain in your seat, Brenda ordered, but her voice had lost some of its authority. A white man in a business suit spoke up. The boy was questioning her instructions. In these times, you can't be too careful with potential threats. Threats, the black man in the cardigan exclaimed. He's a child who needed to use the restroom. What kind of threat did you perceive? Andre's eyes fluttered open, disorientation and pain etched across his young face. Mom? He whispered, his voice cracking. What happened? Jasmine cradled her son's head, her entire body trembling with a mixture of relief and rage. It's okay. Baby, I'm here. A man in a blazer pushed his way through the gathered crowd. Air Marshal Trevor Henderson, he announced, flashing a badge. Instead of addressing Brenda and her unauthorized use of a taser, he turned to Andre. Son, I need you to remain calm and follow instructions. Are you kidding me? Jasmine said incredulously. My son was just assaulted. He needs medical attention, not more intimidation. Andre struggled to sit up, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. The humiliation of the situation hit him as he became aware of his wet pants and the dozens of eyes fixed on him. Tears welled in his eyes, but he fought them back, his father's words echoing in his head. Never let them see you broken. Son, the flight attendant perceived a threat and responded according to her training, Marshal Henderson stated, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes as he glanced at the taser in Brenda's hand. Training, the black man in the cardigan challenged. Stepping closer, I've been flying for 40 years, and I've never seen a flight attendant carrying a taser, let alone using one on a child. My name is Walter Green, and I was a high school principal for 30 years. I know threatening behavior when I see it, and this young man showed none. Other passengers began to voice their opinions, the cabin dividing into factions. Some defended Brenda, citing the need for security and compliance with crew instructions. Others were appalled, pointing out the clear racial disparity in how the situation had been handled. I saw that white boy use the bathroom during the seatbelt sign too, and she didn't say a word to him. A Latina woman called out from several rows back. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, due to an incident in the cabin, we will be making an emergency landing in Philadelphia. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. As the plane began its descent, Jasmine helped Andre back to their seats. His body still trembled from the aftereffects of the taser, and his eyes held a new wariness that broke his mother's heart. She took out her phone with shaking hands, navigating to Samuel's contact. Unable to call during the descent, she texted, "Emergency. Andre tased by flight attendant on plane for trying to use bathroom. Landing in Philadelphia. Need you now." She attached a video link that another passenger had already uploaded to social media. Miles away, in an Atlanta courtroom, Samuel Taylor's phone vibrated in his pocket. During a brief recess, he checked the message, his blood turning to ice as he watched the grainy footage of his son, convulsing on the airplane floor. Without a word to his colleagues, he gathered his papers and strode out of the courtroom, already booking the next flight to Philadelphia. On Flight 1372, Andre leaned his head against the window, silent tears streaming down his face as the plane descended through the clouds. His first flight had become a nightmare, and somewhere deep inside, a terrible understanding was taking root that in America, even the sky wasn't safe for a black boy. The wheels of Flight 1372 screeched against the tarmac of Philadelphia International Airport, the plane coming to a stop far from the terminal. Through the windows, passengers could see police vehicles and ambulances, their lights flashing against the gray afternoon sky. "Would you look at that response time?" muttered Walter Green, the retired principal who had defended Andre. "Funny how fast they show up when it's a black kid being accused instead of protected." As the seatbelt sign dinged off, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Local authorities will be boarding the aircraft. We ask for your continued patience and cooperation." Jasmine held Andre's hand tightly, her jaw set with determination, though her heart raced with fear. Years of advocating for patients in the healthcare system had prepared her somewhat for what was coming. Andre, still physically shaken from the taser, had withdrawn into himself, his eyes fixed on the seat in front of him. The cabin door opened, and for Philadelphia police officers boarded the plane, followed by two Sky High Airways representatives in crisp Navy suits. Brenda hurried to meet them, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward Andre. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man with a crew cut, made his way down the aisle, stopping at row 24. "Are you Andre Taylor?" he asked, his hand resting casually on his holster. Before Andre could answer, Jasmine spoke up. "My son needs medical attention. He was assaulted with a taser by your flight attendant for attempting to use the restroom." "Ma'am, we've received reports of an unruly passenger who became aggressive and threatened a crew member," the officer replied. "I need your son to come with us." "That's not what happened," Walter called out, standing again despite the officer's presence. "The boy did nothing wrong. Check the footage. Dozens of us recorded what really happened." The officer barely glanced at Walter. "Sir, please remain seated. We'll take statements later." To Jasmine and Andre's horror, the officer produced a pair of handcuffs. "Stand up, son. Hands behind your back. You're arresting him." Jasmine's voice rose in disbelief. "He's the victim here. We're detaining him while we sort this out," the officer corrected, though the distinction meant little as he reached for Andre's wrists. Jasmine placed herself between the officer and her son. "My son needs medical attention, not handcuffs. I'm a registered nurse, and he's showing signs of cardiac stress from electrical shock. Ma'am, if you interfere with this detention, I'll have to arrest you as well," the officer warned. Walter moved into the aisle, phone held high. "I'm recording this. That boy needs a doctor, not handcuffs, and he needs his rights protected." Several other passengers joined Walter, holding up their phones. "We all saw what happened," a middle-aged white woman in a business suit said. The flight attendant was out of line. The standoff continued until a second officer moved forward. "We can take him to the hospital under guard, but he's coming with us." Jasmine, seeing no immediate alternative, nodded stiffly. "I'm coming with him. He's a minor, and I'm his mother." The officers agreed to this, though they still placed Andre in handcuffs before escorting him off the plane. The image of a handcuffed, trembling black teenager being led through the first-class cabin would later become one of the most powerful visuals in the media coverage of the incident. As they reached the jet bridge, Jasmine looked back to see Walter and several other passengers exchanging contact information, preparing to stand as witnesses. Their small acts of solidarity provided the only glimmer of hope in the dark situation. At the hospital, Andre was treated for taser exposure while a police officer stood guard outside his examination room. Doctors noted elevated cardiac markers and muscle damage consistent with high-voltage electrical shock. Despite these findings, the officer continued to refer to Andre as the suspect rather than the victim. Meanwhile, the story was breaking across news outlets with wildly varying narratives. Some headlines read, "Teen subdued after threatening flight attendant," or "Airline defends security protocols after incident." Others more accurately reported, "14-year-old black teen tased on flight after bathroom request," or questions of racial bias in airline tasing incident. Sky High Airways wasted no time issuing a statement. "Sky High Airways supports our crew members' decisions to ensure cabin safety. Our flight attendants are trained to handle security threats according to protocol. We are conducting an internal review of the incident, and the crew member involved has been placed on administrative leave with pay during this process." Social media exploded with opinions. The hashtags #JusticeForAndre and #SupportBrenda began trending nationally, revealing the deep racial divides that still existed in America. Would you have spoken up if you witnessed what happened to Andre? Comment number 1 if you believe more passengers should have intervened immediately. Or number 2 if you think it's safer to just record and report later. Hit like if you believe airline staff need better anti-bias training. and subscribe to follow Andre's journey toward justice. And can you believe what happens next when Detective Morrison tries to pressure this family? While Andre was still being examined, Detective Kevin Morrison arrived at the hospital, a veteran of the Philadelphia Police Department with 20 years on the force. Morrison had a reputation for handling sensitive cases, particularly those with racial elements, in ways that minimized institutional liability. Mrs. Taylor, he began, cornering Jasmine in the hospital corridor. I understand you're upset, but I think we all want to resolve this situation quickly and quietly. Jasmine crossed her arms. My son was assaulted for trying to use the bathroom. There will be nothing quick or quiet about my response. Morrison sighed, leaning closer. Look, not everything is about race. Kids can be disruptive. Flight attendants can be having bad days. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. My son was tased for doing exactly what a white child did without consequence. Jasmine replied, her voice steady despite her rage. If you think this isn't about race, you're either blind or complicit. The detective's expression hardened. Mrs. Taylor, pursuing this aggressively could result in charges against your son for interfering with a flight crew, a federal offense. Is that really what you want? Before Jasmine could respond, a commanding voice cut through the tension. Are you threatening my client's son? Detective Morrison, Samuel Taylor, stood at the end of the corridor, his 6-foot frame impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. Despite having rushed from court directly to the airport, his presence seemed to fill the space, his calm demeanor belying the fury in his eyes. Samuel, Jasmine moved to her husband's side, drawing strength from his presence. Mr. Taylor, Detective Morrison's tone shifted slightly. I was just explaining the potential complications of pursuing this matter. My son was assaulted by an airline employee who used an unauthorized weapon against him for attempting to use the bathroom, something she permitted a white child to do moments earlier. Samuel stated with the precision of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. The only complication here is the blatant racial discrimination and excessive force used against a minor. Now, are you planning to arrest the flight attendant who assaulted my son, or should I contact the district attorney directly? Morrison backpedaled. We're still gathering statements. These situations are never as clear-cut as they seem. They certainly are when dozens of passengers recorded the incident. Samuel countered. Now, I'd like to see my son. As Morrison retreated, Samuel embraced Jasmine tightly before they entered Andre's room together. The sight of his son, usually vibrant and curious, lying pale on the hospital bed, with monitor wires attached to his chest, nearly broke Samuel's composure. Dad, Andre's voice cracked as he reached for his father. Samuel took his son's hand, his thumb gently stroking the red mark left by the handcuffs. I'm here now, he said softly, and I promise you, they will answer for this. Later that evening, after Andre had been discharged with instructions to follow up with a cardiologist, Samuel made a series of calls from their hotel room, first to his law partners to clear his schedule, then to Eleanor Pierce, a former FBI agent who now worked as his investigator. Eleanor, I need everything on Sky High Airways, their security protocols, and especially this flight attendant, Brenda Wilson, and I mean everything. As Samuel hung up, he noticed Andre sitting silently by the window, staring out at the Philadelphia skyline. Andre, he said gently, I want you to know this isn't your fault. None of it. Andre turned, his young face carrying an expression no child should have to wear. But if I had just stayed in my seat. No. Samuel's voice was firm but gentle. You did nothing wrong. You have the same right to use that bathroom as anyone else on that plane. What happened to you was wrong, and we're going to make sure it never happens to another child. Andre nodded slowly, but Samuel could see that the incident had planted seeds of doubt and fear that would take more than words to uproot. His son had experienced firsthand what Samuel had spent his career fighting against, the reality that in America, simply existing in black skin could transform the most mundane actions into perceived threats. As Andre finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, Samuel's resolve hardened into steel. The system had bared its teeth at his son, but it had no idea what it had awakened in return. The next morning dawned gray and damp over Philadelphia. Matching the mood in the Taylor family's hotel suite, Andre had slept fitfully, waking several times from nightmares in which he was falling, electricity coursing through his body. Jasmine had barely slept at all, alternating between comforting her son and quietly weeping with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Samuel, however, had transformed overnight into a force of nature. While his family slept, he had set up an impromptu command center at the suite's dining table, his laptop open to multiple tabs of research, legal pads filled with notes, and 3 phones lined up before him: his personal phone, his work phone, and a new prepaid phone for sensitive calls. At precisely 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Samuel opened it to reveal Eleanor Pierce, his longtime investigator. In her early 50s, Eleanor had the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing and the weathered confidence of a woman who had spent decades navigating male-dominated institutions. "You made good time," Samuel noted, ushering her in, "when you said your son was involved." "I was on the first flight out," Eleanor replied, setting down her battered leather briefcase. She glanced toward the bedroom door where Andre and Jasmine were still resting. "How is he?" Samuel's professional facade cracked slightly. "Physically, he'll recover. The other damage," he trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Eleanor squeezed his arm briefly, then opened her briefcase. "I've already started digging into Sky High Airways and Brenda Wilson. You're not going to like what I found." For the next hour, they pored over Eleanor's initial findings. Brenda Wilson had been employed by Sky High Airways for 8 years, but this wasn't her first incident involving black passengers. There had been 3 formal complaints filed against her in the past 2 years alone, all from black passengers who reported hostile, aggressive behavior. All 3 complaints had been investigated internally and dismissed. The complaints disappeared into a black hole, Eleanor explained, showing Samuel the documentation she'd obtained through her network of contacts. "And guess who oversees passenger complaints? Richard Collins, Vice President of Security for Sky High, former NYPD, and from what my sources tell me, a man with some very problematic views on race." Samuel frowned, studying the grainy photograph of Collins, a square-jawed man with cold eyes. Any connection to the Philadelphia police or Detective Morrison? Eleanor's smile was grim. "I was wondering when you'd ask. Morrison and Collins are cousins by marriage. They go fishing together twice a year." Samuel's jaw tightened. That explains Morrison's attempt to make this go away. As they continued reviewing the documentation, Andre emerged from the bedroom, his movements still stiff from the aftermath of the taser. Seeing Eleanor, he hesitated in the doorway. "Andre, this is Eleanor Pierce," Samuel said gently. "She's the best investigator I know, and she's going to help us get to the truth." Eleanor's usual tough demeanor softened as she looked at the teenager. "Hello, Andre. I'm very sorry about what happened to you." Andre nodded silently, making his way to the couch where he curled up with his phone. Within minutes, his expression darkened. "Dad," he called, his voice unsteady. "People are saying I was being violent. They're saying I deserved it." Samuel crossed to his son. Glancing at the social media feeds Andre was scrolling through, comments ranged from supportive to viciously racist, with many users accepting Sky High's narrative without question. "Close that app," Samuel advised, sitting beside Andre. "Social media isn't where truth lives. We know what happened, and we have the evidence to prove it. But they're making me sound like a criminal." Andre's voice cracked. "That's their strategy," Eleanor explained, joining them. "They're trying to control the narrative, but we're going to change that." Over the next several days, the Taylor family relocated to a different hotel after receiving threatening messages at their first location. Andre, once excited about touring colleges, now refused to leave the hotel room, jumping at sudden noises and flinching when strangers came too close. Jasmine took an emergency leave of absence from her nursing position to stay with Andre, while Samuel and Eleanor built their case through careful investigation. They uncovered disturbing patterns within Sky High Airways. The taser wasn't standard equipment, Eleanor reported after interviewing a former Sky High security trainer under the guise of a background check. Flight attendants are not issued tasers, nor are they trained to use them. Brenda brought that on board herself, which violates about a dozen federal regulations. Samuel nodded, adding this to his growing file. What about the airline's response protocol? They claimed she acted according to training. Pure fiction, Eleanor confirmed. Their official protocols explicitly state that flight attendants should de-escalate situations with minors and involve the air marshal or captain before taking any physical action. As their investigation deepened, Samuel approached several major law firms about partnering on the case, only to be politely but firmly turned down. The airline industry's influence ran deep, and few wanted to risk future corporate clients by challenging a major carrier. We're on our own, Samuel told Jasmine that night. But maybe that's better. No compromises, no settlements driven by partner concerns. Jasmine, who had been quietly supportive throughout, took Samuel's hand. When have you ever needed a big firm behind you? Your entire career has been David versus Goliath. This is no different. Except it's our son, Samuel said quietly, which is why you'll fight harder than you ever have. Jasmine replied. The media narrative continued to slant against Andre, with many outlets referring to him as aggressive or non-compliant despite the video evidence. The family discovered they were being surveilled when Andre spotted a man photographing them through the hotel restaurant window during a rare venture outside their room. Just as their spirits were flagging, Samuel received an encrypted email from an anonymous source claiming to have internal information about Sky High Airways. After careful verification through Eleanor, they arranged a secure meeting at a small coffee shop in the outskirts of Philadelphia. The whistleblower turned out to be Olivia Martinez, a flight attendant who had worked for Sky High for 5 years. Nervous but determined, she slid a USB drive across the table to Samuel. There's a reason Brenda hasn't been fired despite multiple complaints, Olivia explained in a hushed voice. She's protected by Collins. What happened to your son wasn't an isolated incident, it's part of an unofficial policy. What kind of policy? Samuel asked, his lawyer's instinct sensing a critical breakthrough. Olivia glanced around before leaning closer. Collins calls it passenger management, but it's racial profiling. There are unwritten guidelines about which passengers to watch more closely, which ones to make examples of if they step out of line. Black passengers, especially black men and boys, are at the top of that list. Samuel's expression remained neutral, but his hand tightened around his coffee cup. And the tasers? Not standard issue, but Collins has created a special security team of flight attendants who carry them. Brenda's one of them. It's all unofficial, with nothing in writing. But the message is clear. Why are you telling me this? Samuel asked. You're risking your job. Olivia's eyes welled with tears. Because I watched that video of your son, and I can't be part of this anymore. I've documented everything I could, including emails where Collins discusses how to handle difficult minorities. It's all on that drive. As Olivia left the coffee shop, Samuel knew they had just gained not only a crucial witness, but evidence that could transform their case from an individual incident into a pattern of systemic discrimination. That evening, as Samuel reviewed the files from Olivia, his phone rang with an unknown number. When he answered, a deep voice spoke without introduction. This is FBI agent Dominic Washington. I'm calling about the incident involving your son, Andre Taylor. I think we should talk. The Rittenhouse Square Park bench where Samuel Taylor met FBI agent Dominic Washington offered little privacy, but as Washington explained, that was precisely the point. Harder to monitor a conversation in the open, the agent said, his dark suit immaculate despite the summer heat. And I need to be clear, this conversation isn't happening officially. Samuel studied the man beside him. Agent Washington was in his early 40s, with close-cropped hair and the disciplined posture of someone with military background. Why the cloak and dagger approach? Because Sky High Airways has friends in high places, Washington replied. And because what happened to your son wasn't an isolated incident. I've been quietly tracking a pattern of discriminatory security practices across multiple airlines, with Sky High being the worst offender. You're investigating them. Washington nodded, keeping his voice low. Civil rights violations in interstate commerce fall under federal jurisdiction. I've been building a case for 8 months, but it's sensitive. The airline industry has powerful lobbyists who've already tried to shut down my investigation twice. Samuel processed this information, seeing both an ally and a potential complication. Why reach out to me now? Because your son's case has created a window of opportunity. The videos are too clear, too damning for the usual cover-up. But you need to know what you're up against. Richard Collins isn't just some overzealous security VP, he's implementing a systematic program of racial profiling disguised as security protocols. This confirmed what Olivia Martinez had told them. Samuel shared the information they'd gathered, including the existence of their whistleblower. Though he protected Olivia's identity, be careful, Washington warned. Collins has contacts throughout law enforcement and transportation security. The fact that your son is already being portrayed as the aggressor in some media outlets is no accident. As Samuel returned to the hotel, he found Jasmine watching the news with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Walter Green, the retired principal who had defended Andre on the plane, had appeared on a morning talk show with his own recording of the incident. His eloquent, measured account was providing a counter-narrative to Sky High's version. "I spent 30 years working with young people," Walter stated firmly to the camera. "I know threatening behavior when I see it. What I witnessed was a polite, young man being treated as a threat solely because of the color of his skin." The interview was already going viral, with Walter's hashtag truth for Andre gaining traction against the airline's preferred narrative. "He didn't have to do that," Andre said quietly from the doorway, watching the screen with something like hope in his eyes for the first time since the incident. "Some people still recognize injustice when they see it," Samuel replied. Walter's interview seemed to break a dam over the next few days. More passengers from Flight 1372 came forward with their videos and testimonies. Their evidence made it increasingly difficult for Sky High to maintain their version of events. The full medical report was also released, confirming that Andre had suffered cardiac stress from the taser information. That further shifted public opinion. Seizing the momentum, Samuel formally filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Sky High Airways, Brenda Wilson, and Richard Collins. The complaint detailed not just Andre's experience, but alleged a pattern of discriminatory practices targeting black passengers. Sky High's first response was predictable. They offered a settlement of $50,000 with a non-disclosure agreement. Samuel didn't even dignify it with a counteroffer. "They think they can buy our silence," he told Jasmine that night. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." 2 weeks after the incident, as the case began gaining national attention, Andre agreed to a single carefully controlled interview with a respected journalist, known for her fair coverage of racial justice issues. Sitting between his parents, Andre recounted his experience in a steady voice that only occasionally betrayed the trauma beneath. "I was excited for my first flight," he explained. "I was going to see colleges I dreamed of attending. Instead, I learned that even doing something as simple as asking to use the bathroom can be dangerous if you're black in America." The interview humanized Andre in a way that sterile news reports couldn't, showing viewers the thoughtful, soft-spoken, honor student who had been treated like a criminal. Viewers saw his college aspiration, his interest in engineering, his close relationship with his parents, all the dimensions of his humanity that had been flattened in earlier coverage. Public opinion continued to shift as more information emerged. Former Sky High employees began contacting Samuel's office with their own stories of witnessing discriminatory treatment of passengers. Eleanor compiled their statements, building a compelling picture of systematic bias within the airline. Meanwhile, Olivia Martinez's leaked documents proved invaluable. Internal emails showed Collins discussing ways to maintain control of certain passenger demographics and implementing unofficial policies for identifying high-risk travelers using criteria that clearly targeted minorities. The airline's attempts at damage control grew increasingly desperate. Richard Collins personally reached out to several witnesses, suggesting that their recollections might be mistaken and hinting at potential consequences for their false statements. This backfired spectacularly when one witness recorded the call and released it to the media. FBI agent Washington continued his parallel investigation, occasionally sharing information with Samuel through secure channels. The federal investigation lent additional credibility to the Taylors' case, suggesting that the government itself recognized the seriousness of the allegations. As pressure mounted, cracks began to appear in Sky High's United Front. A board member anonymously expressed concerns about the company's handling of the situation. The airline's stock price began to fluctuate as investors worried about potential damages and reputation harm. For Andre, the growing support offered a path toward healing. The initial shock and humiliation were giving way to a cautious determination. When Walter Green organized a small gathering of supportive witnesses at a local community center, Andre agreed to attend. "I want to thank you," Andre told Walter, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "for standing up for me when most people just watched." Walter placed a gentle hand on Andre's shoulder. "When we see injustice and remain silent, we become part of the problem. I couldn't let that happen to you, son." The gathering was a turning point for Andre. Surrounded by people who had witnessed his trauma and still seen his humanity, he began to reclaim his sense of dignity and worth. The most unexpected development came when Jasmine discovered that Brenda Wilson had been fired from the previous airlines before joining Sky High. Eleanor's investigation revealed that both terminations had involved conflicts with minority passengers, information that had somehow been overlooked in Sky High's hiring process, or more disturbingly, had been considered an asset under Collins' security philosophy. As the lawsuit proceeded into discovery, Sky High hired Victoria Preston, a high-powered defense attorney known for her aggressive tactics, her reputation for destroying witnesses' credibility, and finding procedural loopholes to derail legitimate claims preceded her. At the first procedural hearing, Victoria approached Samuel in the courthouse corridor. "I admire your dedication, Mr. Taylor," she said with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But you're fighting a losing battle. My client is." Prepared to weather this storm, Samuel met her gaze steadily. "My son was assaulted for being black in America. There's no storm your client can weather that compares to what generations of our children have endured. The difference is, this time, we have the evidence, the law, and the moral high ground on our side." Victoria's smile tightened. "We'll see about that. The law isn't always as clear-cut as we'd like it to be." As she walked away, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria knew something he didn't. The battle was far from over, and Sky High was preparing to fight dirty. The first hint of Sky High's new strategy appeared 3 days after Victoria Preston took over the airline's defense. A small tabloid website published an article titled "The Troubled Past of Andre Taylor: What the Media Isn't Telling You." The piece claimed that Andre had a history of disciplinary problems at school and had been involved in several confrontations with authority figures. Every word was fiction. Andre was an honor roll student whose teachers consistently praised his respectful demeanor and academic dedication, but the damage was done. The false story spread rapidly through certain corners of the internet, providing ammunition to those already inclined to blame Andre for the incident. "They're lying about me," Andre said, his voice hollow as he showed his father the article on his phone. "How can they just make stuff up?" Samuel's fury was cold and focused. "Because they're desperate. They know the facts aren't on their side, so they're trying to destroy your character instead." The Taylor family soon discovered this was just the opening salvo in Victoria Preston's scorched earth campaign. Within days, more stories appeared. Anonymous sources claiming Andre had been disruptive throughout the flight, fabricated accounts of previous incidents, even implications that Samuel had coached his son to provoke a reaction for a lucrative lawsuit. The smear campaign extended to Samuel himself. Suddenly, his past cases were being scrutinized by right-wing media outlets, with headlines questioning his motives and methods. Old quotes were taken out of context, and former opponents were interviewed about their grievances. "Can you believe these people?" Jasmine fumed, turning off the television after a particularly vicious segment. "They tased our child, and now they're acting like we're the criminals for seeking justice." The pressure intensified when Andre returned to school after their return to Atlanta. Though the principal and many teachers were supportive, some students had absorbed the false narratives circulating online. Andre faced whispers, hostile stares, and in a few cases, outright bullying. "They're calling me a liar," Andre reported. Quietly after his third day back, some kids said, "I'm just trying to get rich by playing the race card." After a particularly ugly incident in the cafeteria, where a student mimicked being tased to mockery and laughter, Samuel and Jasmine made the difficult decision to switch Andre to online learning temporarily. "It's not fair," Andre protested. Weakly, though his relief was evident. "I shouldn't have to hide." "You're not hiding," Samuel assured him. "You're focusing on your education while we fight this battle." Sometimes strategic retreat is the wisest move. The attacks grew more personal and more coordinated. One morning, Eleanor called Samuel with alarming news. "Someone broke into my office last night," she reported, her voice tight with anger. They knew exactly what they were looking for. "All the files related to Andre's case are gone, including my notes on our whistleblower." Samuel immediately thought of Olivia Martinez. Was there anything that could identify her? No names, but there were details someone could use to narrow it down. "We need to warn her." When they tried to contact Olivia, however, they discovered her phone had been disconnected. A discreet inquiry revealed she had suddenly taken extended personal leave from Sky High. The digital dimension of the attack became clear when Eleanor's investigation uncovered evidence that Sky High had hired a reputation management firm specializing in social media manipulation. The firm was operating thousands of bot accounts to push narratives favorable to the airline and attack Andre's credibility. They're spending more on covering this up than it would cost to simply acknowledge wrongdoing and implement real changes, Samuel observed grimly. Even Jasmine wasn't spared. She received notice that her nursing license was under review due to anonymous complaints about her professional conduct, complaints that mysteriously appeared right after she gave a powerful interview supporting Andre. Is this justice? How far should corporations be allowed to go to protect their image? Comment number 1 if you think there should be stricter laws against character assassination. Or number 2 if you believe Sky High's tactics are just part of the legal game. Like if you're outraged by the way this family is being treated. And subscribe to see how Samuel finally turns the tables on this powerful corporation. But wait until you hear what happens to Walter Green for simply telling the truth. Walter Green, who had become one of Andre's most vocal advocates, paid a heavy price for his principles. The retired principal, who had been teaching part-time at a private academy, was suddenly terminated. The school's official reason cited budget constraints, but Walter later learned that a board member with connections to Sky High's parent company had pressured the school's administration. "They can take my job," Walter told Samuel when they spoke about the situation, "but they can't take my integrity. I saw what happened to your son, and I won't be silenced." FBI agent Washington faced obstacles of his own. During a secure meeting in a public park, he informed Samuel that transportation regulatory agencies were suddenly stonewalling his requests for information. "Someone's applying pressure from above," Washington explained, tossing breadcrumbs to nearby pigeons as cover for their conversation. "I'm being told to focus on more pressing security concerns than passenger complaints." The implications were clear. Sky High's influence extended into government agencies that should have been providing oversight. When Samuel confronted Victoria Preston during a deposition break about the increasingly underhanded tactics, her response chilled him. "Mr. Taylor," she said with practiced concern, "I can assure you that Sky High Airways conducts itself with the highest ethical standards. These conspiracy theories do your case no favors." Then, lowering her voice, she added, "You're swimming in deeper waters than you realize. There are bigger forces at play than just an airline defending itself. Some battles aren't worth the cost to your family." Before Samuel could respond, she walked away, leaving him to wonder exactly what bigger forces she was referring to. The answer came unexpectedly through Olivia Martinez. After weeks of silence, she contacted Samuel through an encrypted email service, arranging to meet at a small church during a community event, a public setting where they could talk without attracting attention. "I had to disappear for a while," she explained. her eyes constantly scanning the room. They were getting close to figuring out I was your source. Are you safe now? Samuel asked. Olivia's bitter laugh held no humor. As safe as anyone can be when taking on people like Richard Collins. But there's something you need to know. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. The tasers aren't just unauthorized equipment. They're part of an unofficial passenger control program specifically targeting minorities. We suspected as much, Samuel acknowledged. It's worse than you think, Olivia continued. Collins didn't develop this program in isolation. It was adapted from a pilot initiative created by a private security firm with government contracts. The same techniques being used against your son on that plane are derivatives of methods developed for counterterrorism. Samuel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. You're saying this goes beyond Sky High? The airline industry has been working with certain security contractors to implement proactive threat management since 9/11s. What happened to Andre was an extreme case, but the underlying philosophy treating certain passengers as inherent threats based on racial profiling, that's institutional. This revelation explained Victoria's warning about bigger forces and the pressure being applied to Agent Washington's investigation. They weren't just fighting an airline, they were challenging a deeply entrenched security approach that powerful interests wanted to protect. As Samuel drove home from the meeting, he found himself being followed by an unmarked black SUV. When he took several random turns to confirm his suspicion, the vehicle stayed with him until he pulled into a crowded shopping center parking lot. That night, Samuel called a family meeting in their living room, with all electronic devices left in the kitchen to prevent any potential surveillance. The opposition is stronger than we anticipated, he explained to Jasmine and Andre, and they're willing to go to extraordinary lengths to discredit us and make this case disappear. Are you saying we should give up? Andre asked, his young face showing a mixture of fear and determination. No, Samuel replied firmly. I'm saying we need to be prepared for how difficult this fight will be. They've shown they'll attack our reputations, our livelihoods, even our safety. Before we continue, I need to know we're all committed to seeing this through, no matter what. Jasmine took Andre's hand, then reached for Samuel's. They hurt our son and then tried to criminalize him for being a black child, asking a simple question. There's no power on earth that will make me back down from this fight. Andre squeezed both his parents' hands. I keep thinking about other kids like me. If they can do this to me, with my dad being a lawyer and everything, what happens to kids who don't have anyone to fight for them? Samuel felt a surge of pride through his concern. Despite everything, Andre was thinking beyond himself, recognizing the broader implications of their struggle. Then we continue, Samuel decided. But we change our strategy. They want to fight dirty. They have no idea what they're up against. The federal courthouse in Atlanta imposed a sense of gravity with its imposing columns and marble floors. Samuel Taylor had walked these halls hundreds of times throughout his career, but never with so much personally at stake as he did the morning of the hearing on Sky High's motion to dismiss. Victoria Preston had filed a comprehensive motion arguing that the case should be thrown out. Before trial, her filing claimed that federal aviation regulations gave flight attendants broad discretion in maintaining cabin safety, that Andre's behavior constituted non-compliance with crew instructions regardless of his intent, and that there was no evidence of racial motivation in Brenda Wilson's actions. Judge Elaine Harrington, a veteran jurist with a reputation for meticulous attention to legal detail, presided over the packed courtroom. The case had drawn national attention, with civil rights organizations filing amicus briefs supporting the Taylors, while airline industry associations backed Sky High. Victoria presented her arguments with polished confidence, emphasizing the need for courts to defer to flight crew judgment in matters of cabin safety. Your Honor, if passengers are allowed to second-guess safety instructions based on perceived disparate treatment, the entire aviation security framework becomes unworkable. When Samuel's turn came, he approached the podium with calm purpose. Your Honor, this case is not about questioning legitimate safety protocols. It's about an airline employee using a prohibited weapon against a child who simply asked to use the restroom, a request that had been granted to a white child moments Earlier, he methodically dismantled Victoria's arguments, pointing out that Sky High's own written procedures prohibited the use of tasers, that Andre's actions did not meet any reasonable definition of threatening behavior, and that the growing evidence of systemic racial profiling within the airline couldn't be dismissed as coincidental. The question before this court is not whether flight attendants have authority to maintain cabin safety. Of course they do. The question is whether that authority includes the right to electrocute a black child for doing exactly what a white child did without consequence. Judge Harrington's ruling was unequivocal. The motion to dismiss is denied. The plaintiff has established sufficient cause to proceed with discovery and trial preparation. This court finds that the serious allegations of civil rights violations warrant full examination. It was the first major victory for the Taylor family, and it opened the floodgates for the discovery process, the formal exchange of evidence between parties that would form the backbone of the trial. Sky High's legal team had vastly underestimated Samuel Taylor. While they had been focusing on character assassination and intimidation, Samuel had been methodically building an airtight case with Eleanor's help. Now, armed with the court's authority to demand documents and testimony, he moved with surgical precision. The discovery process yielded damning evidence. Internal Sky High training materials included sections on passenger threat assessment that used coded language to instruct flight attendants to apply heightened scrutiny to certain passenger types, descriptions that overwhelmingly matched racial profiles. Even more damaging was the email trail showing how Richard Collins had systematically buried complaints against Brenda Wilson and other flight attendants accused of discriminatory treatment, creating a culture of impunity. While the legal battle proceeded, public pressure continued to mount. The hashtag boycott Sky High gained traction, with several celebrities and public figures announcing they would no longer fly with the airline. The Federal Aviation Administration, facing congressional pressure, launched its own investigation into Sky High's security practices. Walter Green, with the backing of his teachers' union, fought his unjust termination and won reinstatement with back pay. His return to teaching was celebrated by students and parents, who had rallied to his defense after learning why he'd been fired. The most significant development came when 3 former passengers who had experienced similar treatment on Sky High flights contacted Samuel. Their stories followed a disturbing pattern. Minor or non-existent infractions by black passengers met with disproportionate responses from crew members. Samuel amended the complaint to include these additional plaintiffs, transforming the case into a class action lawsuit that challenged the airline's entire approach to passenger management. Media coverage shifted dramatically as more evidence became public. Even outlets that had initially presented Andre as the aggressor now questioned Sky High's training and security protocols. Investigative journalists began digging into the connections between private security contractors and airlines, exposing the questionable practices that Olivia had warned about. Meanwhile, Andre was slowly healing. The psychological impact of the incident couldn't be erased, but with therapy and the visible progress of the lawsuit, he began to reclaim his confidence. He returned to in-person classes after Walter organized a student support group that made it clear bullying would not be tolerated. Expert witnesses for the case included psychologists who assessed the trauma Andre had experienced, aviation security specialists who testified that tasers were expressly prohibited on commercial flights, and statisticians who analyzed Sky High's incident reports to demonstrate the disproportionate targeting of minority passengers. Perhaps the most powerful evidence came from video analysis experts who examined the footage frame by frame, conclusively demonstrating that Andre had shown no aggressive behavior whatsoever. Their report highlighted how Brenda's body language and positioning showed premeditation before she used the taser, suggesting she had decided to use the weapon before any perceived threat existed. As the weight of evidence against them grew, Sky High's strategy shifted. Victoria approached Samuel with a significantly larger settlement offer, $5 million with a limited confidentiality agreement that would allow the Taylors to discuss the incident, but not the specific terms of the settlement. Samuel didn't even need to consult with his family before declining. This isn't about money. He told Victoria, "It's about changing a system that treats black children as threats for existing." Victoria's professional composure slipped momentarily. "You're making a mistake, Taylor. $5 million would set your son up for life." "My son was already set up for life," Samuel replied evenly. "He had parents who love him, a first-rate education, and unlimited potential. What he didn't have, what no black child in America has, is the guarantee that he can simply exist without being perceived as dangerous. That's what this case is fighting for. And it's not for sale at any price." As the trial date approached, Sky High Airways faced a perfect storm of negative consequences. Their stock price had dropped nearly 30% as investors recognized the potential financial and reputational damage of a public trial. A consumer boycott had reduced bookings by a significant margin, and internal morale had collapsed as employees questioned the leadership that had created this crisis. In a desperate bid to contain the damage, Sky High CEO Ronald Matthews held a press conference where he acknowledged lapses in judgment, while insisting they were isolated incidents rather than systemic problems. "We've identified a few bad apples within our organization," he stated with practiced concern, "and we're taking steps to ensure such incidents never happen again." But behind closed doors, Matthews was panicking. In a leaked recording of a board meeting, he could be heard demanding to know how this whole mess with the Taylor kid had been allowed to spiral out of control, and instructing his team to find anything they could use to force a settlement. What Matthews didn't realize was that his own emails would soon become the most damaging evidence of all. As the trial approached, Samuel Taylor prepared to expose not just individual actors like Brenda Wilson and Richard Collins, but an entire corporate culture that had enabled and encouraged racial profiling under the guise of security. The trial of Taylor v. Sky High Airways began on a crisp October morning, 8 months after the incident that had changed Andre Taylor's life forever. The federal courthouse steps were crowded with journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens, drawn by a case that had come to symbolize the broader struggle against racial profiling in America. Inside the courtroom, Samuel Taylor sat with his family and their legal team, his expression serene despite the stakes. Across the aisle, Victoria Preston conferred with her associates, while behind them sat Sky High executives, including Richard Collins and CEO Ronald Matthews. Brenda Wilson was notably seated apart from the corporate team, a physical indication of the company's strategy to distance itself from her actions. Judge Harrington called the court to order, and the trial began with opening statements. Victoria went first, presenting a carefully crafted narrative that acknowledged the unfortunate nature of the incident, while denying any racial motivation or corporate liability. "This case is about a misunderstanding that escalated due to the unique pressures of maintaining safety at 30,000 feet, she told the jury. Ms. Wilson made a split-second decision based on her perception of a security threat. While the outcome was regrettable, it does not constitute discrimination or a violation of civil rights." When Samuel rose to deliver his opening statement, the courtroom fell completely silent. Without notes or podium, he walked to the center of the space before the jury. "This case is about a 14-year-old honor student who needed to use the bathroom," he began. "Simply, it's about how the color of his skin transformed that basic human need into a perceived threat. It's about a corporation that trained its employees to see black bodies as inherently dangerous, and about the devastating consequences when that perception is backed by unauthorized weapons and unchecked authority." For the next 20 minutes, Samuel outlined not just what had happened to Andre, but the broader pattern of discrimination within Sky High, the attempts to cover up evidence, and the campaign to silence witnesses. By the time he returned to his seat, several jurors were visibly moved, and even Judge Harrington seemed affected by the clarity and moral force of his presentation. The trial proceeded with witness testimony, beginning with passengers from Flight 1372 who had witnessed the incident. Walter Green's testimony was particularly powerful, as he described not only what he had seen on the plane, but the retaliation he had faced for speaking out. "I spent 30 years teaching young people to stand up for what's right," he told the jury. "When I saw that young man being tased for asking a question, I knew I couldn't remain silent even when it cost me my job. The defense attempted to portray the witnesses as biased or mistaken in their perceptions, but the consistency of their accounts, supported by multiple video recordings from different angles, proved difficult to undermine. On the third day of trial, Brenda Wilson took the stand. Under Victoria's careful questioning, she portrayed herself as a dedicated professional who had perceived a threat in Andre's confrontational stance and refusal to comply with safety instructions. I feared for the safety of everyone on that aircraft, she claimed, her voice trembling slightly. In my 20 years as a flight attendant, I've never faced such an aggressive response to a simple instruction. Samuel's cross-examination was methodical and devastating. He established that Brenda had no formal training in threat assessment, that Sky High's own policies prohibited the use of tasers, and that she had allowed a white teenager to use the bathroom under identical circumstances just minutes earlier. "Ms. Wilson," Samuel asked, his tone conversational, "in your 20 years as a flight attendant, how many passengers have you tased?" Brenda shifted uncomfortably. "Just the one incident." "Just my son," Samuel clarified. "And in those 20 years, how many white passengers have you tased for asking to use the bathroom during a seatbelt sign?" "Objection, argumentative," Victoria called out. "Sustained," Judge Harrington ruled. "Rephrase, Mr. Taylor." Samuel nodded respectfully. "Ms. Wilson, have you ever used a taser or any similar device on a white passenger?" "No," Brenda admitted. "And yet you testified earlier that you've encountered many instances of passenger non-compliance throughout your career, correct?" "Yes, but thank you." "Ms. Wilson, no further questions." As the trial continued, Olivia Martinez provided damning testimony about Sky High's unofficial policies. Despite attempts by Victoria to paint her as a disgruntled employee, Olivia's detailed knowledge of internal procedures and her documentation of discriminatory practices proved compelling to the jury. "We were told to watch certain passengers more closely," she explained. "The training never explicitly mentioned race, but the examples and descriptions made it clear who they meant. And there was a special security team, led by Mr. Collins, that had additional tools for passenger management." The expert witnesses further strengthened the Taylor's case, with particular impact from Dr. Eliza Bennett, a respected child psychologist who had assessed Andre. "The psychological trauma experienced by Andre Taylor is profound," Dr. Bennett testified. "Being physically assaulted by an authority figure, publicly humiliated, and then criminalized for a normal request has created deep-seated anxiety and trust issues that may take years to fully resolve." Richard Collins took the stand on the 7th day of trial, projecting confidence and authority as he defended Sky High's security protocols. Under Victoria's questioning, he portrayed the airline's approach as based solely on behavior, not race, and insisted that any statistical disparities in enforcement actions were coincidental. Samuel's cross-examination began gently, establishing Collins' background and role at Sky High. Then, methodically, he began dismantling the security director's credibility. "Mr. Collins, you testified that Sky High does not issue tasers to flight attendants, correct?" "That's correct. They are not standard equipment." Samuel approached with a document. "I'd like to enter this into evidence as Plaintiff's Exhibit 42. This is an email from you to the Special Response Team, dated January 15th of last year. Could you read the highlighted portion?" Collins' composure flickered as he read, "Team members will be provided with enhanced passenger management tools, including CED devices, for use in Level 2 and Level 3 interventions." CED stands for Conducted Energy Device, correct? Another term for tasers? "In certain contexts, yes." "And who authorized this program?" "Mr. Collins." Collins hesitated, glancing toward the Sky High executives. "It was a collaborative decision." "A collaborative decision," Samuel repeated. "Was CEO Matthews part of this collaboration?" "Objection," Victoria interjected. "Relevance." "Your Honor," Samuel responded, "the defendant has claimed that Ms. Wilson acted as a rogue employee. The authorization chain for these weapons goes directly to corporate liability." Overruled. Judge Harrington decided, "The witness will answer." Collins' shoulders sagged slightly. Yes, CEO Matthews approved the program. A murmur ran through the courtroom as the implications became clear. This wasn't just about Brenda Wilson or even Richard Collins. The airline's highest leadership had authorized a program that armed flight attendants with weapons, prohibited by aviation regulations. The climax of the trial came with the surprise testimony of FBI agent Dominic Washington, who had received departmental clearance to testify after the scope of Sky High's program became public knowledge. Through the trial, the Bureau began investigating Sky High Airways approximately 14 months ago. Washington testified, after statistical analysis revealed a pattern of security incidents disproportionately involving minority passengers, what we discovered was a systematic approach to passenger profiling that targeted specific racial and ethnic groups. Under the guise of security protocols, Victoria's objections grew increasingly desperate as Washington detailed how the evidence collected by the FBI corroborated the Taylors' claims and went even further, suggesting potential criminal violations of federal civil rights statutes. When CEO Ronald Matthews was called to testify, the corporate strategy of blaming subordinates collapsed entirely. Under Samuel's relentless questioning, Matthews attempted to deflect responsibility onto Collins and the special security team, only to be confronted with his own emails approving the program and its methods. "Mr. Matthews," Samuel asked as he concluded his cross-examination, "when you authorized flight attendants to carry tasers to use against problematic passengers, did you ever imagine that one day the target would be a child simply asking to use the bathroom?" Matthews had no answer. In his closing argument, Samuel spoke directly to the jury about justice, accountability, and the America they wanted to create for all children. What happened to Andre Taylor wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding, he told them, his voice resonating with conviction. It was the inevitable result of a system that teaches its employees to see black skin as inherently threatening. When Andre stood up to use the bathroom just as a white child had done moments before, he wasn't evaluated as a 14-year-old honor student excited about his first flight. He was evaluated as a threat, because that's exactly how Sky High trained its employees to see him. Samuel walked closer to the jury box, his gaze connecting with each juror in turn. "My son will carry the scars of this incident for the rest of his life, but your verdict can ensure that other children won't have to bear the same burden. You have the power to send a message that corporations cannot trade on our safety, dignity, and civil rights in the name of security theater. You have the power to say that in America, a black child deserves the same respect and humanity as any other child." As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, an uneasy silence fell over the courtroom. Samuel returned to his family, drawing strength from Jasmine's steady presence and Andre's quiet courage. Whatever happened next, they had forced a reckoning that could not be undone. That night, as the jury sequestered in a hotel to consider their verdict, the Taylor family received anonymous death threats at their home. Despite the fear such threats naturally evoked, they reinforced for Samuel the importance of their stand. The vicious response to their pursuit of justice only highlighted how necessary that pursuit was. The next morning, as everyone assembled in the courtroom awaiting the jury's decision, Victoria approached Samuel with one final settlement offer: $15 million, no confidentiality agreement, and a public apology from Sky High. "This is the best outcome you can hope for," she urged. "Juries are unpredictable. Take the certain victory." Samuel studied her carefully. "You've seen the jury's faces. You know which way they're leaning." Victoria didn't deny it. "Take the offer, Samuel. Some of my clients' investors are getting nervous about punitive damages." Before Samuel could respond, the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. The opportunity for settlement had passed. As Judge Harrington called the court to order, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The jury foreperson, a middle-aged black woman who had maintained an inscrutable expression throughout the trial, stood to deliver their decision. In the case of Taylor v. Sky High Airways, she began, "On the count of violation of civil rights under color of authority, we find for the plaintiff. On the count of assault and battery, we find for the plaintiff. On the count of negligent hiring and supervision we find for the plaintiff on every count. The jury found in favor of the Taylors. When it came to damages, they awarded Andre $20 million in compensatory damages and an unprecedented $50 million in punitive damages against Sky High Airways. The courtroom erupted in reaction, with gasps, cheers, and the furious scribbling of journalists capturing the historic moment. Judge Harrington gavelled for order before addressing the defendants directly. In light of the evidence presented in this trial, I am referring this matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. The deliberate violation of federal aviation safety regulations, obstruction of justice, and potential conspiracy against civil rights warrants further examination beyond the scope of this civil proceeding. As the court adjourned, Samuel embraced his family, their long fight for justice finally vindicated. But he knew that the true measure of their victory would not be found in monetary damages or even criminal charges. It would be in the changes their case would force throughout an industry that had too long hidden discrimination behind the shield of security. Jasmine Taylor stared in disbelief at the settlement check, $20 million, 6 months ago. Her son Andre had been brutally tased on Flight 1372 for simply asking to use the restroom. Now, this airline would never forget the day they messed with Samuel Taylor's son. The journey from that horrific moment on the plane to this final resolution had transformed not just the Taylor family but had rippled outward, changing an industry and challenging America's assumptions about race, authority, and justice. In the aftermath of the verdict, the consequences for Sky High Airways and its executives were swift and far-reaching. The Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into the airline's security practices, resulting in charges against Brenda Wilson for assault and civil rights violations. Richard Collins faced more serious charges of conspiracy against civil rights and obstruction of justice for his role in creating and concealing the unauthorized security program. Most significantly, CEO Ronald Matthews was indicted for knowingly authorizing prohibited weapons on commercial aircraft and creating a corporate environment that encouraged racial profiling. His defense that he was merely focusing on enhanced security collapsed when prosecutors revealed emails in which he explicitly discussed using stricter measures against certain demographic groups to make examples that would keep others in line. The FBI investigation that Agent Washington had begun expanded to include other airlines with similar practices. What emerged was a troubling picture of an industry that had used post-9/11 security concerns as cover for implementing discriminatory practices with little oversight or accountability. For Walter Green, the retired principal whose moral courage had been a turning point in the case, justice came in the form of full reinstatement to his teaching position with back pay and a formal apology from the school board. The students organized a celebration for his return, many wearing t-shirts bearing the hashtag #TruthForAndre that had become synonymous with standing against injustice. You taught us something more important than any textbook ever could, one student told Walter during the celebration. You showed us what integrity looks like when it's tested. Olivia Martinez, whose whistleblowing had provided crucial evidence, initially feared she would never work in the airline industry again. Instead, she was hired by the newly formed Aviation Passenger Rights Commission, a federal oversight body created in response to the Sky High case. Her intimate knowledge of discriminatory practices made her an invaluable asset in reforming the industry she had once been part of. The Taylor family's victory extended far beyond financial compensation. Using a portion of the settlement, Andre established the Flight 1372 Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of racial discrimination in transportation and providing legal resources to those who couldn't afford representation. I want to turn what happened to me into something positive, Andre explained at the foundation's launch event. No one should face discrimination when simply trying to travel, and no one should lack the means to seek justice when their rights are violated. Sky High Airways, faced with the dual pressures of legal consequences and consumer backlash, underwent a complete corporate restructuring. The new leadership implemented mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, created a diverse passenger advocacy board with actual authority, and established transparent oversight of all security protocols. Most importantly, they eliminated the covert profiling practices that had been central to their previous approach. The changes weren't limited to a single airline. The Federal Aviation Administration, under congressional pressure stemming from the case, instituted industry-wide regulations regarding passenger treatment and prohibited discriminatory security measures. For the first time, airlines were required to collect and publicly report data on passenger complaints categorized by race, enabling patterns of discrimination to be identified and addressed. Jasmine returned to her nursing career with a new focus on trauma recovery, specializing in helping young people deal with experiences of racial discrimination and institutional violence. Her insights from both professional training and personal experience made her an invaluable resource for families navigating similar traumas. For Andre, healing was a gradual process. The nightmares about the tasing became less frequent, though. Certain triggers like the sound of electrical equipment or crowded, confined spaces could still provoke anxiety. Working with the foundation gave him purpose and a sense of agency that helped counterbalance the helplessness he had felt on that flight. Samuel found his legal practice transformed by the case. While he had always focused on civil rights, the national attention brought by Andre's case connected him with resources and allies that expanded his ability to take on systemic discrimination. He established a special division within his firm, dedicated to transportation discrimination cases, providing pro bono representation to victims who lacked financial resources. The family also created the Taylor Scholarship Fund for minority students interested in pursuing careers in law or public policy. "We need more voices in the rooms where decisions are made," Samuel explained at the scholarship announcement. "More perspectives that understand what's at stake when policies are created." 1 year after the incident, the Taylor family faced a significant test. Andre needed to travel to Washington, D.C. for a congressional hearing on transportation discrimination, where he had been invited to testify. It would be his first time on an airplane since Flight 1372. The night before the flight, Andre sat with his parents in their living room, anxiety evident in his restless movements. "What if it happens again?" he asked quietly. "It won't," Samuel assured him, "not just because we'll be with you, but because you helped change the system. What happened to you forced people to see the truth, and that truth has created real change." The next day, Andre boarded the flight with his parents beside him. The difference in treatment was immediately apparent. The flight attendants were respectful and professional with all passengers, regardless of race. When Andre needed to use the restroom during the flight, no one questioned his movement or treated him with suspicion. As the plane touched down in Washington, Andre looked out the window at the capital city where he would share his story with lawmakers. "We did it, didn't we?" he said to his parents. "We actually made a difference." Samuel squeezed his son's shoulder. "You made a difference. Your courage in facing what happened instead of letting them silence you. That changed things for a lot of people who never had a voice." In the years that followed, the Taylor v. Sky High Airways case became a landmark precedent cited in civil rights education and legal training. The case study was incorporated into law school curricula nationwide, ensuring future generations of attorneys understood both the legal principles and the human impact of discrimination cases. For the Taylor family, life would never return to what it had been before Flight 1372. They had been changed forever by their confrontation with systemic racism and the fight for justice that followed. But in standing their ground, they had not only secured justice for themselves, but had created pathways to justice for countless others. This powerful story teaches us that justice, while difficult to achieve, is worth fighting for. When confronted with systemic racism, the courage to stand firm against powerful institutions can create lasting change that extends far beyond individual cases. The Taylor family's persistence reveals how a single incident can expose deeper patterns of discrimination that might otherwise remain hidden. We learn that documentation is crucial. The videos taken by passengers provided irrefutable evidence that countered false narratives. The story also highlights the importance of allies, like Walter Green, who risked personal consequences to speak truth to power. The case demonstrates how racial bias can transform ordinary actions into perceived threats, with devastating consequences for those targeted. It shows that true justice isn't just about compensation, but about systemic transformation that prevents future harm. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that accountability is possible even against seemingly untouchable corporations when people refuse to be silenced. The Taylor family's victory wasn't just for Andre, but for countless others who would have faced similar discrimination. The legacy of Flight 1372 teaches us that our individual actions matter. Whether we're standing up like Walter, speaking out like Olivia, or fighting like Samuel, when we witness injustice, our response defines not just who we are, but the kind of society we create together. Call to action. What would you do if you witnessed racial discrimination? Like what happened to Andre? Would you speak up like Walter Green did, or would fear hold you back? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to support more content that shines a light on important social justice issues. Share this video with someone who needs to understand why speaking up matters. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and regretted not taking action? Let us know your experiences. Thank you for watching this journey from injustice to transformation. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, the fight for justice is always worth it.